The man in the wheelchair moved slowly toward the polished glass doors of the bank, gripping a worn envelope in his hand. People barely noticed him. Some glanced, others looked away. To them, he looked like just another man asking for help, someone who didn't belong in a place filled with suits and quiet confidence. But inside the bank, one employee was already watching him. Her eyes narrowed the moment he approached the counter. The room grew tense as her judgment came quickly, sharp and public. Within seconds, whispers began spreading across the lobby, and the man who had quietly rolled inside suddenly found himself the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. What no one in that room realized was that this moment, this small act of cruelty, was about to turn into something none of them would ever forget. Because the man they dismissed so easily wasn't who they thought he was. And when the truth finally came out, the entire bank went silent. The question is, how far did the humiliation go before they realized who was really sitting in that wheelchair? Marcus Ellison had spent most of his life proving people wrong. Years earlier, a devastating accident had taken away the use of his legs. Doctors said his life would slow down, that opportunities would shrink, that the world would quietly move ahead without him. But Marcus refused to accept that future. Instead, he rebuilt everything from the ground up, piece by piece, decision by decision. He worked longer hours than most people around him ever realized. Quietly, patiently, he studied markets, invested wisely, and built a reputation in the business world that few people connected to the man in the wheelchair. Marcus never cared much about recognition. What mattered to him was progress. Over time, his success grew far beyond what anyone expected. Offices opened, partnerships formed, and eventually his investments reached places even he hadn't imagined years earlier. But Marcus never changed the simple habits that grounded him. He still preferred to handle certain matters personally, especially when it came to the businesses he cared about most. That was why, on this particular morning, Marcus decided to visit one of the city's busiest banks in person. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary customer slowly rolling through the glass doors, holding a small envelope and waiting patiently for his turn at the counter. No expensive entourage, no special announcement, just another face in a crowded lobby. What the people inside the bank didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just another customer. And in a few minutes, one careless judgment would turn a routine visit into a moment no one in that building would ever forget. Marcus waited quietly in line, the soft hum of the bank filling the lobby around him. Phones rang behind glass offices, keyboards clicked steadily, and customers shuffled papers while glancing at their watches. To most people there, it was just another busy morning. When Marcus finally reached the counter, the bank teller barely looked up at first. Her fingers continued tapping across the keyboard while Marcus patiently placed the envelope on the polished surface in front of her. But the moment she noticed the wheelchair, something changed. Her eyes scanned him quickly, from the worn wheels beside him to the simple jacket he was wearing. The glance lasted only a second, but it carried a judgment that Marcus had seen many times before in his life. Instead of greeting him like every other customer, she leaned back slightly, her expression tightening. The silence stretched longer than it should have. A few customers nearby began to notice. Marcus calmly explained that he needed assistance with an important transaction. His tone was steady, respectful. But the teller's reaction wasn't what anyone would expect from a professional inside a bank. Her voice suddenly grew sharp enough for nearby customers to hear. She questioned him in a way that felt less like customer service and more like an interrogation. Her eyes kept drifting back to the wheelchair, as if the presence of it alone made his request suspicious. The line behind Marcus began to grow restless. A man waiting nearby shifted uncomfortably. A woman whispered something to the person next to her. The tension in the room slowly thickened as the teller's attitude became harder to ignore. Instead of helping him, she began implying that Marcus might be in the wrong place, that perhaps he should go somewhere else for assistance. Marcus remained calm, even as the situation grew increasingly uncomfortable. He simply repeated his request and waited, but the teller's patience had clearly run out. Her voice grew louder now, drawing the attention of nearly everyone in the lobby. She questioned whether he even had the authority to be making such a transaction. Her tone carried a quiet humiliation that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Customers who had been checking their phones now watched openly. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked curious. But the teller seemed convinced she was doing the right thing. She called over a supervisor, speaking in hushed but urgent tones while occasionally glancing back at Marcus. Moments later, the supervisor approached with the same cautious expression. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him now. What had started as a simple visit was quickly turning into a public spectacle. Still, Marcus said very little. He simply waited, because the envelope resting on the counter contained something that would change the entire mood of the room within seconds. And when the supervisor finally decided to open it, the quiet tension inside that bank was about to explode into something none of them were prepared for. The supervisor picked up the envelope slowly, the tension in the lobby thick enough to feel. For several minutes, the entire bank had watched Marcus like he was a problem that needed to be removed. The whispers, the suspicious glances, the teller's sharp tone, all of it still hung heavy in the air. The supervisor slid a single document out of the envelope. At first, his expression remained neutral as his eyes moved across the page. But within seconds, something shifted. His eyebrows lifted. Then his eyes widened. The paper trembled slightly in his hand as he looked back down, reading the document again, this time much more carefully. The teller noticed the sudden change. Her confident posture slowly began to fade as she leaned closer, trying to see what he was looking at. The room had grown strangely quiet now. Even the customers waiting in line could feel something had changed. The supervisor looked from the document to Marcus and then back to the document again. His face drained of color, because the paper he was holding wasn't just a transaction request. It was official ownership documentation. The bank, this very building, was part of an investment group, and the primary name listed on that document was Marcus Ellison, the same man who had been questioned, doubted, and publicly humiliated just minutes earlier. A ripple of stunned silence moved through the lobby. The teller's confident expression completely collapsed as realization hit her all at once. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She had spent the last several minutes treating the owner of the bank like he didn't belong there. The supervisor quickly straightened his posture, suddenly unsure where to place his hands or how to speak. All eyes turned toward Marcus, the man who had sat quietly through every insult, every suspicious glance, every humiliating moment. And now, the entire room was waiting to see what he would do next. For several long seconds, Marcus said nothing. The bank lobby, once filled with whispers and judgment, was now completely silent. The same people who had watched him with suspicion were now staring in stunned disbelief. The teller who had spoken so confidently just minutes earlier stood frozen, her face pale as the reality of the situation settled in. Marcus slowly reached forward and took the document from the supervisor's trembling hand. There was no anger in his expression, no raised voice, just a calm, steady look that carried something far heavier than frustration. Disappointment, not because of the mistake, but because of how quickly people had decided who he was. The supervisor began apologizing immediately, stumbling over his words, promising to correct the situation. The teller tried to speak as well, but the confidence she once had was gone. The room that had once felt so certain about Marcus now felt painfully unsure of itself. Marcus listened quietly. Then he simply nodded and asked to finish the transaction he had come for. No revenge, no dramatic outburst, just dignity. But the moment stayed with everyone in that room. Because the truth was impossible to ignore, Marcus had been treated like he didn't belong the moment he rolled through the door. Not because of anything he said or did, but because of what people assumed when they looked at him. And that's the part of the story that happens every day to countless people whose names we may never hear. Marcus left the bank the same way he entered, quietly, but the silence he left behind carried a lesson far louder than any confrontation could. Because the real question isn't what happened inside that bank that morning. The real question is this: how often do we judge someone's worth before we even know their story?